found it on a Tuesday in late May, 2 weeks before the students arrived, while I was inventorying the field kits in the basement of Whitcomb Hall. A single artifact tag, pre-printed in my own handwriting, sitting in the drawer where we kept the unused blanks. It read 43-2014-017, and underneath, in pencil, Child's Molar, North Quadrant, 22 centimeters. I had run a field school in Kentucky in 2014. I had not run a Site 43. There was no Site 43 in our records, in the state registry, or in any document I had signed in 12 years. The handwriting was unmistakably mine. I want to be clear about the basement before I go further, because the basement is where most of this happened, and I think people picture something Gothic when an archaeologist mentions a basement. Whitcomb Hall's not Gothic. It was built in 1974. The lowest level is fluorescent and dry, and the field kit room is a converted storage closet with a steel desk, a metal shelving unit, and a 4-drawer filing cabinet that we use for paper supplies. Tags, bags, lined notebooks, the kind of bulk inventory you order once a year from a supply catalog and forget about. The drawer I'm describing was the second from the top. It held blank tags, 500 to a bundle, rubber-banded, sorted by year prefix, because we reprinted the prefix annually. Our prefix that year was 26 for our 2026 season. The tag I found was loose, single, near the back of the drawer, and the prefix was wrong by 12 years and 1 digit. I stood there for a while. I am giving you that moment. Honestly, I did not panic and I did not laugh it off. I did what I have been trained to do, which is to set it on the desk, photograph it from 3 angles with the scale ruler beside it, and write down the time, which was 11:42 a.m. Then I sat down on the metal folding chair and looked at it. The handwriting was mine. I want to be specific about what I mean. I have been a working archaeologist for 12 years and a documenting one for closer to 20. Since I started writing artifact tags as an undergraduate, my handwriting has a particular failure on the lowercase r. It looks more like a sloppy V unless I'm being careful, and a particular flourish on the 2 that comes from the way I was taught to write numerals in 8th grade algebra. The R in quadrant failed correctly. Both 2's in 22 centimeters flourished correctly. I've been writing tags for 2 decades, and I know my own hand the way I know my own footstep on a wooden floor. The tag was mine. I had not written it. I'd like to say I went straight to my office and pulled the 2014 records, but I didn't, not at first. I did something else. I went back to the cabinet, and I checked the other drawers, all 4 of them, and the shelves above, and the steel desk's drawer, and the small lockbox where we kept the petty cash key. I was looking for more. I told myself I was being thorough. The truth is, I already suspected. I found a second tag in the bottom drawer between 2 reams of printer paper, 43-2017-004. The handwriting on this one was not mine. It was rounder with a forward lean and a 4 that closed at the top. Daniel Lim's handwriting. My second year, graduate teaching assistant who would not arrive on campus for another 9 days. Underneath, fragment ceramic, grid line E-7, 14 centimeters. I put the second tag on the desk beside the first. I photographed it. I sat down again. Daniel had attended this field school as an undergraduate in 2017. I had been his instructor. He had been a quiet, careful student, the kind who labels his Ziplocs the night before. I knew his handwriting because I'd graded his tag work that summer. The handwriting was his. He had not written this tag because it had been sitting in a drawer for 9 years before he arrived this season, and because the drawer was not a place graduate students reached into. The drawer was mine. I want to tell you what I did next, in order, because I've gone over this sequence many times trying to find the moment I should have stopped. I locked the field kit room. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. I went into my office, closed the door, and pulled my 2014 fieldwork journal off the shelf. It is a maroon hardcover moleskin, slightly bowed from a humid summer, and it contains every dig day entry from June through August of that year. I flipped to the entry dated whatever the 17th find of the season would have corresponded to late June by my count. The handwriting matched. The same failed R, the same flourished 2. The entry described Site 12, West Quadrant, a worked flint flake at 18 centimeters, and a follow-up sentence about light rain stopping work at 2 p.m. There was no molar. There was no Site 43. There was nothing in that journal to suggest the existence of a parallel record. I sat at my desk and read the entire 2014 journal, cover to cover. It took 90 minutes. I found nothing irregular. I found exactly the season I remembered. 13 students. My advisor's last summer of field work before her sabbatical. A minor flooding incident in the second week. A sprained ankle. A published paper that came out in Southeastern Archaeology the following spring. A normal year. When I closed the journal, I noticed that my hands were cold. The office was not cold. I had not been outside. I want to mention something that I did not register at the time because I think it matters, and I think I understated it then. When I went back down to the field kit room to retrieve the 2 tags from the desk, to photograph them in better light, to bring them upstairs, to do something administrative with them, the field kit that should have been in the second drawer, the one labeled Kit 7, Standby, was not there. It is the kit we keep for emergencies, for when a student loses theirs in the field. It had been there at 11:42 when I'd opened the drawer to inventory the blanks. I am certain of this because I had moved it to access the tag bundles. At 1:30 it was gone. The drawer was otherwise undisturbed. The 2 tags were on the desk where I had left them. I checked every other drawer. I checked the supply closet across the hall. I checked the shelving unit. The kit was not in Whitcomb Hall. I have not seen Kit 7 since. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. A standby field kit is a backpack containing a trowel, a small brush set, line level, 3-meter tape, gridding string, and a clipboard with blank tags. It is not valuable. It is not irreplaceable. It would not be missed by anyone except the principal investigator who had inventoried it 40 minutes earlier. I am telling you this because it was the first thing in this story that did not have a written record. The tags had records. They were the wrong records, but they existed in handwriting on paper. The kit had simply stopped being there. I locked the basement door behind me, took the 2 tags upstairs and put them in the top right drawer of my office desk, the one with the working lock. I turned the key, I put the key on my key ring. I went home. That night I told my husband about the tags, leaving out Kit 7 because I did not yet know how to describe its absence in a way that did not sound careless. Mark is an architect. He does not like archaeology jokes, but he is patient with my work. He listened, refilled my wine, and said what he always says when I bring home a problem. Write it down, sleep on it, and look at it tomorrow. It is good advice. I have given it to students. I gave it to myself. I did not sleep well. I dreamed about the basement, which is not unusual. I dream about work the way people dream about staircases, but in the dream the field kit room had a 3rd drawer I had never noticed. And I was opening it, and I knew before I opened it what would be inside. I woke up at 4:18 a.m. and could not place which detail of the dream had felt wrong. I lay there in the dark, trying to retrieve it, and could not. I went into the office at 7:30 the next morning. I unlocked my desk drawer. There were 3 tags inside. The first 2 were the ones I had locked away. I had photographed them, and I have those photographs still, and the rust-colored watermark on the lower edge of 43-2 014-017 is identifiable in both the original photograph, and in the tag I retrieved that morning. It was the same tag. The third tag was new. The handwriting was neither mine nor Daniel's. It was a small, neat, slightly cramped script that I did not recognize at all. It read 3-2 026-001 underneath in pencil, intake form, residential cabin 3, surface find. I want to tell you what I felt, and I want to be honest. I felt a kind of professional clarity I have not felt since. I understood standing in my office at 7:34 a.m. with 3 tags on my desk that whatever this was had a sequence, and the sequence was advancing. The first tag was 11 years old. The second was 9. Third was dated for this summer. And the find location was the cabin where my incoming students would sleep. And the entry number was 001. It was starting from the beginning. I sat down. I did not photograph the third tag right away. I want you to know that because I have spent a long time wondering whether the photographing was part of the cataloging, whether the act of recording was itself a kind of authorship I was unknowingly contributing. I sat at my desk and I did not write anything down for almost an hour. I just looked at the 3 tags lined up on the green desk blotter. In the soft fluorescent light of my office, with the window open and the sound of the groundskeeper's mower starting up 2 buildings over, the students would arrive in 13 days. Renee, our cook, would arrive in 11 to open the kitchen and stock the dry goods. Daniel and Priya, my graduate TAs, would be on the road by the end of next week. The county liaison had already called twice about the access road. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. 12 undergraduates were already booking their flights, packing their boots, calling their parents to say goodbye for the summer. I closed the drawer. I locked it. I left the third tag inside with the others because I did not yet know what removing it would do, and I had a meeting with the dean at 9. On the way to the meeting, I passed the departmental mail slots and stopped, the way you stop when you remember you forgot something. I had not forgotten anything. I checked my own slot. There was an envelope inside, hand addressed to me in pencil, with no return address. I have not opened that envelope yet in the timeline I am narrating. I want to be careful about that. I will tell you what I did with it in its proper place, but I want you to know it was already there. That morning on the second day, before the students had arrived, before any of this had what I would have then called a shape. The envelope was thin. It felt like it contained one piece of cardstock. It felt more or less like a tag. The students arrived on a Sunday in 3 rented vans from the regional airport between 2:14 and 4:40 in the afternoon. I have the times because I logged them on the intake clipboard the way I log them every year. Priya drove the first van. Daniel drove the second. The third was driven by a graduate student from another department whom we paid $100 and a tank of gas because we had 13 students this season instead of 12. I want to flag that number. We had 12 enrolled. Our funding allowed for 12. Our cabins held 12. The roster I had printed in late April listed 12 names, and I had reviewed and signed it 3 times, including in front of the registrar. On the morning of arrivals, I went to print a fresh copy for the welcome packet, and the printout came out of the tray with 13 names. The 13th was a sophomore named Audrey Kane. I did not know an Audrey Kane. I checked my email. There were no admissions communications with that name. I checked the registrar's portal. She was enrolled in the course. Tuition paid in full. Housing assignment confirmed. Cabin 3, the one our intake forms said was full. I called the registrar. The woman who answered was a person I had spoken to maybe 40 times across my career, named Bev. And she was warm in the way Bev is warm, and she said, of course, we have her, Helen. She's been on the roster since February. You approved her transfer yourself. I asked her to email me the approval. She emailed it to me while we were still on the phone. The email was from my address. The subject line read, Late ad, A. Kane, approved. The body had 2 sentences I would have written, in the cadence I would have written them. The signature block was correct. The timestamp was February 19th, 2:47 p.m. I had been at a conference in Albuquerque on February 19th. I had not opened my email between 2 and 4:30 that afternoon because I had been giving a paper. I thanked Bev. I hung up. I went outside to greet the 3rd van. Audrey Kane was the first student off the bus. She was 19, pale, with dark hair cut short, and she looked at me the way a returning student looks at an instructor they've had before. A small private smile, a half nod, the kind of recognition that doesn't need a hello. I had never seen her in my life. I shook her hand and said, "Welcome, Audrey." And her hand was cold, and she said, "Thank you for letting me come back." She did not seem to notice she had said it. She moved past me to grab her duffel, and Priya behind her was already calling out cabin assignments. I watched Audrey walk to cabin 3. I made a note on the clipboard. Kane A. arrived 4:12 p.m., cabin 3. I did not write down what she had said. I did not know yet what to do with it. I want to give you the camp briefly, because it matters for what comes next. Our field school occupies a 5-acre lease on the edge of a working farm in Hart County, Kentucky, 2 miles down a county road from the nearest town and 40 minutes from the nearest interstate. We have 4 staff cabins, 3 student cabins, a mess cabin, an equipment shed, and a tarped pavilion where we hold morning meetings and evening lectures. Our excavation sites 11 through 14, are on a low ridge that runs along the eastern edge of the property, exposed by erosion in the early 1990s and worked seasonally since. We do not work all 4 sites every year. This year we had budgeted for sites 12 and 14. The other 2 were dormant. The cabins are wooden, plain, and old. They were built in 1981 by the farm's previous owner, who had run a Christian summer camp here for 20 years before selling the lease to the university. Each cabin sleeps 4. Each has a small porch, a propane heater for cold mornings, and a single overhead light. Cabin 3 is the cabin closest to the mess hall, which is why we put the youngest cohort there. It has a pine wreath nailed above the door that has been there longer than I have. I took the welcome packets to the mess cabin at 5:30 for orientation. Renee had laid out the food, chili, cornbread, a tray of cut watermelon, and the students were beginning to drift in the loose, nervous clusters of people who have just met. Daniel was at the head table going through the gritting string in his lap, the way he does when he is nervous. Priya was already eating. The 13 students filled the long benches, and I counted them twice. And there were 13. I gave my welcome talk. I have given it 12 times. I described the sites, the schedule, the rules. No solo trips off the property after dark. No alcohol in the cabins. No personal artifacts removed from the dig under any circumstances. I emphasized the artifact rule the way I have always emphasized it. Calmly, professionally, with the small joke I always make about how the most boring rule is also the one that gets people expelled. The students laughed in the right places. I watched their faces. I want to tell you that I was looking for something on Audrey Kane's face, but I do not think I was. I think I was just trying to see her. She was sitting with 3 other women from cabin 3, listening, her hands flat on the table. She was nodding at the right moments. She was, in every observable way, a normal 19-year-old who had attended an orientation she had already heard the substance of. There is a particular quality of stillness that returning students have, and she had it. The other women had it too, as the talk went on, in a way I could not entirely place. I handed out the welcome packets at 6:18. Each packet contained a campus map, a daily schedule, a housing form, an emergency contact form, and a 1-page intake survey we use for course credit purposes. The packets were identical because I had assembled them myself. The students filled them out at the tables. Daniel and Priya collected them as people finished and stacked them on the head table. I want to describe the moment specifically. I was clearing my plate at the side counter when I heard a student at the second bench say quietly to the student next to her, "Do you know which one is Site 43? It was a sophomore named Maddie Behrens, whom I had taught in a 100-level course the previous fall. She was holding her housing form. She was looking at it with mild puzzlement, the way you look at a form when one of the boxes has been pre-filled with information you don't recognize. I walked over. I asked her what she meant. She showed me the form, page 2, where the student is asked to confirm cabin and dietary preferences, had a paragraph at the bottom that I had not written into the template. It read, "Note, Site 43 work assignments will be distributed during week 1. If you have a preference for trench or screening, please indicate below. HV." The HV was my initials. The handwriting that followed in the "please indicate below" line was the handwriting from the basement tag, my own with the failed R, with the flourish 2. I had not handwritten the form. The template was a Word document I had updated in March. I had printed it on the office laser printer 2 days ago. The printer prints at 600 dpy and reproduces nothing in pencil. The pencil paragraph was on the page anyway. Maddie was watching my face. I think she'd been watching my face for several seconds. I told her, calmly, because that is my voice, because that has always been my voice and all, that it was a clerical glitch, that an old template must have gotten mixed in, that she could ignore the paragraph. I took her form and I told her I would print her a clean one. She thanked me and went back to her chili. I want you to know I lied to her. I knew it was a lie when I said it. I have thought about that lie a great deal in the months since. I walked the form to the head table and sat down next to Daniel, and I asked him, quietly because Priya was at the other end of the bench, to pull up the master inventory spreadsheet on his laptop. He had been maintaining the master inventory for 3 weeks since we'd arrived early to set up. He nodded, opened it, and turned the screen toward me. The spreadsheet had columns for each active site, 11, 12, 13, 14. Daniel had set it up in a sheet template I had emailed him in April. I knew the template. I had built it. There was a 5th column. It was labeled 43. It had 3 entries. The first read, child's molar, north quad, 22 centimeters. The second read, ceramic fragment, grid line E-7, 14 centimeters. The third read, intake form, residential cabin 3, surface find. The handwriting fields where Daniel logged the recording author listed me, Daniel, and a third initial, a C, that I did not at first recognize. Audrey Kane had not signed any forms yet. She was 8 feet away, eating cornbread. Daniel was looking at me. He said, "I didn't make that column, Helen." He said it the way a careful student says something he thinks might get him in trouble. I watched him scroll, and the column had been there since the spreadsheet's creation date. And the creation date was a day in March when Daniel had been on spring break in Vermont, and the files last edited by Field read H. Voss. I told Daniel that it was a clerical glitch. I told my second-year graduate teaching assistant, the person I had trusted with the master inventory, that the contamination of his work was a glitch. I watched him decide to believe me, because he wanted to, and because I was his advisor, and I watched his face settle the way faces settle when they accept a small lie they suspect. I did not correct it. I closed the laptop. I told him to delete the column and we'd talk about it tomorrow. He did. I watched him delete it. He saved the file. He closed it. The row count went from 4 columns to 3. He nodded at me and I touched his shoulder the way I touch my TA's shoulders, and I told him to enjoy his dinner. I went back to my cabin at 7:45, and I sat on the porch with my laptop, and I opened the spreadsheet from the shared drive on my own machine. The 43 column was there, 3 entries, The last edited by Field Reed D. Lim, 7:42 p.m., 2 minutes after Daniel had deleted it. I closed the laptop. I closed it slowly with both hands, the way you close a book in a library when you are not sure who else is in the room. I want to give you all one more thing from that night because it became important later and because I owe it to the chronology. The first day at Site 12 was the next morning. We worked from 7 to 11 and then again from 1 to 4 in the heat. The students were nervous and slow, the way first years are. Maddie Behrens was on screening. Audrey Kane was assigned to the north quadrant of Site 12 with 2 other students and Priya supervising. I was at Site 14 with Daniel, doing the initial photo documentation for the season opener. At 10:47 a.m., a student in Audrey's group, a junior named Tobias Reyes, whom I will tell you more about in due time, uncovered a worked flint flake at 11 centimeters in the north quadrant. It was a clean, thin flake, the kind you find in this region every few seasons. It was a real find. Priya bagged it and tagged it and brought it down to the equipment shed for me to see at the lunch break. The students were thrilled. Tobias was beaming. Maddie took a photograph of the flake on her phone, the way students always do, holding the camera over the laid-out artifact tray with the morning light coming in through the shed's open door. She showed me the photograph. I looked at it on her phone screen with the tag visible, the flake visible, the metric scale visible. The tag in the photograph read, Site 12 N quad, 11 centimeters flake. She showed me the photograph again that evening at dinner because she wanted to send it to her mother. I said sure. I watched her tap the share button. The photograph opened in her camera roll and the metadata strip at the top showed the file name, which her phone had auto-generated at the moment of capture. The file name read, site_43_flake_north_quad_22 centimeters .jpg. The depth was wrong. The site was wrong. The image was correct. Maddie didn't notice. She sent the photograph to her mother. Her mother texted back a heart emoji. I want to tell you what I noticed only after, walking back to my cabin in the dark, with the cicadas going and the porch lights of the 3 student cabins glowing through the trees. I noticed that I had not, at any point during the day, heard Audrey Kane speak. Not at breakfast, not at the morning meeting, not at the dig, not at lunch, not at dinner. I had watched her work. I had watched her eat. I had watched her listen. She had not made a sound that I could identify as her voice. I told myself she was shy. I told myself she was tired. I told myself a great many things on the path between the mess cabin and my own porch. And when I got inside, I sat at my little desk and I opened my own field notebook to the next blank page. I had not written in it yet that day. The page was not blank. It was filled, top to bottom, in my handwriting, in pencil, with a list of 47 students' names. Some of them I recognized. Students from previous cohorts, going back years. Some of them I did not. At the top of the page, neatly underlined, was the heading, Site 43, Personnel Present. The 13th name from the top was Audrey Kane. The 47th at the very bottom of the page was Maddie Behrens. The cicadas were loud. The porch heater clicked on. I sat there for a long time, and I did not write anything, and I did not photograph anything, and I did not tear the page out, because I had begun to suspect, and this is the first time I will say it plainly, that destroying the record was not how this worked. The record was not the contamination. The record was the residue. The contamination was the act of recording itself. I closed the notebook. I went to bed. I dreamed, I think, but I do not remember the dream, only that I woke at 3:40 a.m. and was certain, the way you are certain of a sound you did not consciously hear, that someone had been on the porch and was no longer there. The boards outside my door creaked once, very softly, as the night cooled. In the morning when I checked, there was a fresh artifact tag taped to the inside of the screen door at eye level, where I would not have missed it. It was blank. The prefix was 43-. I took the blank tag down before any student could see it. I did not photograph it. I did not file it. I held it in my palm for a moment, looking at the prefix, and then I walked out to the gravel path beside the cabin, and I dropped it into the metal trash barrel, where we burned the day's paper waste each evening. It was 6:14 a.m. The barrel was empty. The tag landed at the bottom and lay flat against the rust-colored metal, prefix up. I want to explain why I burned it, or tried to, and why I am suspicious of that decision in retrospect. I had spent the night thinking, in the half-asleep way you think during insomnia, about what kind of problem this was. I had been raised professionally to believe that documentation was the foundation of every legitimate excavation, that an artifact without a tag was a rumor, and a tag without a record was a fiction, and a record without a chain of custody was misconduct. I had built a 12-year career on the discipline of writing things down. The contamination, whatever it was using that discipline against me, so I had decided at some point around 4 a.m. that I was going to refuse to play. I was going to stop logging anomalies. I was going to stop photographing. I was going to remove the inputs. That morning, dropping the tag into the barrel was the first attempt. I want to tell you what happened to that tag because I checked the barrel that evening before Renee lit it for the night burn. The tag was not there. The barrel was empty in the way it had been empty the morning before. I do not know whether someone retrieved it or whether it had never landed in the way I remembered. I did not ask anyone. There was no one to ask. Breakfast was normal. The students were stiff from the first day's work, the way they always are, and the conversation at the long table was about sore knees and trowel calluses and whether the showers had hot water. Audrey Kane ate quietly. I greeted her by name and she nodded. Tobias Reyes told a story about his grandfather that I did not pay attention to because I was thinking about how to begin. By 8 a.m., I was at my desk in my staff cabin with my laptop open and the door closed. I had told Daniel I was running paperwork that morning. I had told Priya to take both groups at Site 12 until I came down at lunch. I was going to do what I should have done 2 weeks earlier. I was going to audit 12 years of records and find every instance of the prefix. I started with the field school's internal archive, which lives on the university's secure server, 12 seasons, 12 master inventories, roughly 4,000 artifact entries across all sites and all years. I sorted by site code. The 43 prefix had 38 entries. That was the first number that genuinely frightened me, and I want you to understand why. 38 entries is not a clerical glitch. 38 entries is a long-running practice. 38 entries is a column in the master inventory that has been quietly maintained by multiple authors across multiple seasons without my noticing. I scrolled through them. The earliest was dated 2014. The most recent had been added that morning at 6:42 a.m., which was 28 minutes after I had dropped the tag into the trash barrel. The author field read H. Voss. I had been at breakfast at 6:42 eating eggs. I want to tell you what the entries described because the pattern matters. They were ordinary. That was the first hard thing about them. They were exactly the kind of finds you would expect from 12 years of competent field work in this part of Kentucky. Flakes, sherds, a bone tool, a fire-cracked rock, 2 pieces of historic glass. They had stratigraphic depths consistent with our regional profile. They had quadrant designations that mapped to a site grid I did not have. The grid, when I tried to reconstruct it from the entries, was internally consistent across 12 years. Site 43 had a north, south, east, and west quadrant. It had a datum point. It had been worked on a schedule. The tags had been authored by 21 different people, and I knew 19 of those names. They were former students. I want you to understand that I sat at that desk and read those entries for almost 2 hours, and the experience was not unlike reading a memoir of a life I had not lived. Site 43 had a season-by-season character. Some years it had been productive. Some years it had been quiet. There had been, in 2018, an interim report drafted, a real document, 11 pages, in a folder I had never opened. I opened it. The author field read H. Voss. The references at the end cited 2 of my published papers and a state archaeological journal article I had peer-reviewed in 2017. The writing voice was mine. I want to be careful when I say that. I do not mean it imitated me. I mean I read paragraphs and could not have told you, blind, that I had not written them. I read a methods section that described a screening protocol I had introduced at the field school in 2016, and I read it and thought, yes, that is what we do. And only afterward did I think, but I have never written that down anywhere, except in my head. I closed the document at 10:14 a.m. My laptop battery was at 41%. I plugged it in, and I went to the next phase of the audit, which was external. I checked the state of Kentucky's public archaeological site registry. Our active sites, 11 through 14, were listed. There was no Site 43. I sent a query through the registrar's general inbox asking about any sites carrying a 43 prefix in our project number. I did not expect a fast reply. I got one in 8 minutes. The reply from a state archaeologist named Glenn, whom I had known professionally for 9 years, read, "Helen, you submitted that one yourself in 2015? Your final reports is still pending. No rush. Hope all's well at the school." I asked Glenn to forward me the original submission. He did. The cover letter was on departmental letterhead, dated October 14th, 2015. The signature was mine. The signature was the wet ink signature, scanned at 300 dots per inch, with the small loop on the V that I had been making since college. I had a binder in my office, 2 floors up from the field kit basement, that held every signed document I had submitted to the state of Kentucky over the course of my career. I had read that binder cover to cover when I'd been preparing my tenure file in 2018. There had been no Site 43 cover letter in it. There had been 31 cover letters. I had counted them. I have always counted them, because that is the kind of person tenure makes you. I emailed Glenn back and thanked him and said I'd send him the final report soon. I want you to register that. I lied to a colleague in writing in an email that would be archived and searchable in the regular voice I used with Glenn for 9 years. I lied to him because the alternative was to start a conversation I did not yet know how to have. I told myself it was triage. I have thought about that lie too. It is the second one I told. The first was to Maddie Behrens at orientation. They were small lies, and they were not the same kind. I went next to my own publications. This is the part I do not entirely know how to write about, even now. I had published across 12 years, 23 peer-reviewed articles, 2 book chapters, and 1 monograph. I had a vanity habit, the way most academics do, of keeping PDFs of all of them in a single folder on my desktop, organized by year. I opened the folder. I opened the 2019 Conference Proceedings article, a co-authored piece with a colleague at Tennessee on lithic distribution patterns in the Pennyrile region, and I scrolled to the references. Footnote 19, which I did not remember writing, read, "See also the unpublished 43 assemblage data, Voss et al. And Prep, which corroborates this distributional pattern at the sub-regional scale." I was a co-author of Voss et al. I knew the et al. They were 2 graduate students who had attended the field school and contributed analysis. I emailed my Tennessee colleague. His name is Rob, and we had been friends since graduate school, and I asked him casually whether he remembered the in-prep paper we'd referenced in footnote 19. I phrased it as if I was just trying to remember whether we'd ever finished it. Rob replied within 20 minutes. He was at his office between classes. His message read, "Helen, are you serious? We argued about that paper for an hour at the AAA mixer. You wanted to fold it into the pennyrile piece and I told you it was too thin. You said you'd hold it and submit separately. I assumed you had, did you?" I told him I'd find the draft. 3 lies now. I sat on my porch at 11:30 a.m. and I made a cup of coffee in the small drip machine and I drank it and I did not move for some minutes. I want to give you that interval because that interval is the one in which I made the decision that organized everything that came after. I decided to keep going. I decided that I needed to know the scope before I decided what to do. I told myself this was a forensic decision. I told myself I was an archaeologist and the work in front of me was archaeological. I am not entirely sure that was true. I think it was also that I could not stop reading. By 12:30, I had 3 more pieces of evidence on my desk. The first was an old photograph of the field school's 2009 cohort, scanned on the departmental webpage where we kept our alumni materials. There were 13 students in that photograph, plus Daniel's predecessor, plus me. I had not noticed before, in the dozen times I'd looked at that page, that one of the students in the back row was holding an artifact tag toward the camera, the way students sometimes do for fun. The tag was legible if you zoomed in. The prefix was 43-. The second was a master's thesis from 2017 by a former student named Hannah Arroyo, which I had served on the committee for. I pulled the PDF from the university's repository. The bibliography was 41 pages long. 11 of the citations were to Site 43 material. I had signed the thesis. My signature was on the front matter. I had read every page of that thesis. I had not noticed the citations. The third was harder to look at. It was a string of small entries, 6 in total, across 3 different former students' theses, also from cohorts I had advised, scattered through bibliographies the way ordinary citations scatter. Each one was to Voss H. in prep, Site 43 assemblage analysis. 3 different students, 3 different years, citing the same in prep paper. The paper Rob had told me I'd argued about at the AAA mixer. I called Hannah Arroyo. She had graduated in 2017 and was now an assistant curator at a regional history museum in southern Ohio. I had not spoken to her in 2 years since I'd written her a letter for the curatorial position. I called her at the museum's main number, and the receptionist put me through. She was warm. She was glad to hear from me. We talked about the museum for a few minutes, and her toddler and her partner's job. Then I asked her if she remembered her summer at the field school. She said, of course. She said that summer changed my life, Helen. She said, I still tell people about Site 43. You were so patient with us that summer. I want to tell you that she said this in the natural voice of a person remembering her own past. There was no hesitation. There was no peculiarity in her tone. She was not performing. She was remembering. She remembered Site 43 the way I remembered Site 12. She had memories of working it. She named another student, Caleb, who had been on her grid. She mentioned the heat that July. She mentioned a thunderstorm that had stopped work for an afternoon, which I remembered because that thunderstorm had stopped work at Site 12 in 2017, exactly as she described. I asked her gently what she remembered about the molar. She said, which molar? And then, after a beat, oh, the one we found in the north quadrant. God, I haven't thought about that in years. You logged it, I bagged it, it went to the lab and I never heard back. Did you ever publish on it? I told her I was working on it. Lie number 4. I think 4. I had begun to lose track. I thanked her. I told her to take care of her toddler. I hung up. I sat at the desk for a long time after that call. The light in the cabin had shifted. Lunch was happening in the mess hall 100 yards away. I could hear the screen door of the mess cabin slamming open and shut as students came and went, and I could hear Renee laughing about something, and I could hear, faintly, the radio she kept on the kitchen shelf playing a country station I had never been able to identify. Hannah Arroyo had a real bodily memory of working on a site that did not exist. She had bagged an artifact that had been in my desk drawer that morning, 8 years and 1 state away. The artifact and the memory were both real, and they were both in places they should not have been. I decided then to look earlier. I went to the departmental archive, which is in the 3rd floor reading room of Whitcomb Hall, behind a locked door that the secretary opens for tenured faculty without questions. I was off campus in a cabin in Kentucky, but the digital portion of the archive is accessible from the staff VPN, and the digital portion includes the scanned logbooks that the department had digitized in 2008 as part of a preservation grant. I logged into the VPN. I opened the scanned logbooks. I went to 1987. That is 2 years before I was born. No, I have to correct that. I was born in 1981. So it is 6 years after, which means I would have been 6 years old when the logbook was being kept. I am noting the math because I want you to understand that I checked it 3 times sitting at that desk. The 1987 logbook had been kept by a graduate student named Marcus Tan, who was now a tenured professor at Vanderbilt and whom I had met twice at conferences. The logbook covered the department's summer fieldwork for that year, which had been at a different site in a different county under a different principal investigator, my dissertation advisor Margaret Holcomb, who had died in 2011. The logbook had a folder of inserts. I clicked through them. Tag specimens, photo prints, soil sample slips. The standard 1987 paperwork. The 3rd insert in the folder was an artifact tag. The prefix was 43-. The handwriting was mine. The failed R, the flourished 2. The loop on the V where my name should have been. The date in the corner read July 14th, 1987. I would have been 5 years old, almost 6. I had not lived in Kentucky. I had not held an artifact tag. I had not, to my knowledge, met Margaret Holcomb yet. I would not meet her until 2003 in a graduate seminar. I scrolled to the next page of the logbook, where the daily journal entries were kept. The page was missing, cleanly missing, not torn. The digitization showed a gap in the page, numbering between 47 and 49, with a small note from the archivist. Page 48, not present at scanning. The note was dated 2008. I closed the laptop. I want to tell you that I sat there for several minutes without thinking, and I do not mean that as a figure of speech. I mean my mind was working in a way that did not produce sentences I could have written down. It was working in shapes. The shape it produced, eventually, was that whatever this was, it was older than my career. It had been writing in my hand before I had a hand. It had been waiting for me to learn the writing. That was the moment, I think, that I crossed from puzzlement into fear. I went to lunch at 1:10 because I had told Daniel I would be there at 1, and I did not want to be the kind of investigator who skipped meals. The students were already eating. Renee had made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Tobias Reyes was at the end of the second bench, talking to 2 other students about his grandfather, who was, he was saying, 91 years old, and lived in Glasgow, Kentucky, about 40 miles from the field school. Tobias was 20. I caught the tail end of what he was saying as I walked past with my tray. He said, he used to talk about a Helen something. They were on some dig together in the 80s. He had a crush on her. My grandma used to give him hell about it. The 2 students laughed. Tobias laughed. He took another bite of his sandwich. I sat down across from Daniel, and I did not say anything to anyone for 3 minutes. Then I asked Tobias in the casual voice of a department head making conversation what his grandfather's name was. He said Walter Reyes. He was a graduate student here like a long time ago. He didn't finish, switched to law school, but he still got all his old field notes in a box in his garage. He showed me when I told him I was coming to your field school. He was excited. I asked him if his grandfather still had the notes. He said, yeah, he loves that stuff. You should come meet him sometime. He'd love to meet you. I told Tobias that maybe I would. Daniel was watching me. He had been watching me, I realized, since I'd sat down. He had not said anything. His sandwich was half-eaten. The tomato soup was developing a skin. He looked in that moment like a graduate student who was beginning to understand that his advisor was carrying something he had not been told about. I do not know what he saw in my face. I had not been making an expression on purpose. He said very quietly, Helen, can we talk after dinner? I said yes. I want to mention one more thing before I close this chapter, because it happened that afternoon and because I think it was the moment Priya Shah was added to the list, although I would not understand that for another 2 days. After lunch, I had a meeting on my calendar I did not remember scheduling. It was a 15-minute video call with my department chair, scheduled for 2 p.m., titled Site 43, Interim Discussion. I had not put it on my calendar. The invite had come from my own address. I sat at my cabin desk at 1:55 and I considered not joining. I joined. The chair, whose name is Bill Crane and who has been chair for 6 years, came on screen with his usual bookshelves behind him, smiling, asking how the season was going. We talked for 4 minutes about logistics. Then he said easily, so listen, where are we on the 43 write-up? You promised me a draft last spring and I never bugged you about it, but the dean was asking and I told him you were close. I told him I was close. Lie 5. He thanked me. He said, no rush. Just keep me posted. He said, you've been carrying that one a long time, Helen, I know. He said it kindly. He meant it. He had known me for 15 years. We hung up at 2:11 p.m. I closed the laptop. I sat on the porch in the heat. The students were back at the dig. The cicadas had not started up yet. They would start at 3 o'clock, the way they did every afternoon in this part of Kentucky in late June. The mess cabin's screen door slammed once, and then again. Renee was washing dishes. The radio was playing. I wrote down on a piece of scrap paper every person who had so far appeared in this audit, either by their work or their memory. The list, when I finished, had 19 names. I numbered them. I folded the paper. I put it in my back pocket. When I went to bed that night, I took the paper out of my pocket and unfolded it on the desk to copy it into my notebook. There were 20 names. The 20th, in my handwriting, at the bottom of the list, was Priya Shah. I want to tell you for the record that I had not yet at any point in this season written Priya's name in connection with Site 43 in any document, paper, or electronic that I could account for. The pencil mark was crisp. The paper was the same paper. The handwriting was mine. The cabin door was locked. The window was closed. Outside on the porch, the boards creaked once, the way they had creaked the night before. The cicadas had stopped. The talk with Daniel happened that night on the porch of my staff cabin, after the students had gone back to their cabins and the mess hall lights had clicked off. He came up the steps at 9:40 with 2 beers from the staff fridge, which we were technically not supposed to have during the season, and he sat down on the second step with his back against the railing and waited for me to start. I want to tell you that I told him everything I did not. I told him about the tags in the basement and the column in the master inventory. I did not tell him about Hannah Arroyo, or Marcus Tan's logbook, or Walter Reyes in Glasgow, Kentucky, or the meeting with Bill Crane, or the 20 names in my back pocket. I told him perhaps 30% of what I knew, and I told it in the voice of a department head briefing a junior colleague on an administrative irregularity. I gave him just enough to explain why I had been distracted and why I had asked him to delete the column. He listened the whole time. He drank half his beer. When I finished, he said, "Okay," and then, after a long pause, "I think I have something to add." He had been finding 43 tags in his backpack for 2 days. The first one had appeared on Sunday afternoon in the side pocket where he kept his pens. The same day he'd driven the second van of students up from the airport. He had assumed it was a tag from a previous student that had migrated. The handwriting was his own, which had not surprised him at the time because he wrote a lot of tags. The entry described a ceramic fragment at grid line E7. He had not thought about it again until Monday morning, when he'd found a second one in the same pocket, also in his hand. This one for a piece of fire-cracked rock at grid line E9. He had not been to grid line E anything. We did not have an E grid line at sites 12 or 14. The site grids ran A through D. He had decided Monday afternoon that he was going to wait and see if I mentioned the column in the spreadsheet. When I had not, when I had told him it was a glitch, he had decided to keep waiting. He had wanted, he said, not to be the kind of TA who brought paranoid theories to his advisor in his first season as a graduate student. I told him I understood. I asked if he still had the tags. He took them out of his shirt pocket. There were 4 of them now. The last 2, he said, had appeared that afternoon while he was supervising at Site 12, in the same shirt pocket he'd been wearing all day. He had not put them there. He had not taken his shirt off. He had not let anyone near the pocket. The 4th tag described a child's molar, north quadrant, 22 centimeters. I did not tell him that one had been the first. I want you to understand that there was a kind of relief in that conversation that I have been trying to characterize. Honestly, Daniel was not safer for knowing, and I was not safer for telling him. But the loneliness of carrying it alone had been doing its own damage. And when he handed me the 4 tags and said we should figure this out together, I felt a release in my chest that I have since identified as a warning. Relief in this kind of situation is the sound of the contamination expanding to include another person. I did not say that to him. I thanked him. I told him to keep the tags for now and to tell me if more appeared and to please not tell Priya yet. Not because I didn't trust Priya, but because I needed to think about how to bring it to her. He nodded. He went down the steps. He turned halfway across the gravel and said, "Helen," and waited until I looked at him and said, "You're not okay, are you?" in the voice of a person who had already decided to ask whether I wanted to be told. I said, "I'm fine, Daniel. Get some sleep. Lie 6. I went inside. I put the 4 tags on my desk, beside the 3 already in the locked drawer, and I did not lock them away. I left them on the desk. I am not sure why. I think I was beginning to understand that locking them away was not protection. I think I wanted, in some small way, to see what would happen. I went to bed at 10:30. I slept. I did not dream that I remembered. I want to describe the next morning carefully because the morning is when it happened, and because I have replayed it more times than I have replayed any other 40-minute interval of my adult life. The first thing I heard at 4:14 a.m. was the screen door of the women's cabin 3, slap shut. Once. Cleanly. The sound of a person leaving a cabin without holding the door behind them. I was awake instantly. My cabin was 40 feet from cabin 3. I lay in the dark and listened. I heard footsteps on the gravel path that led down towards Site 12. The footsteps were unhurried. They were barefoot. Gravel does not give a clean sound under a bare foot. It scrapes, it shifts. And that was the sound. Scraping and shifting. Walking past my cabin and down the slope. I got up. I pulled on my jeans and my flannel and my boots. I took my flashlight from the shelf by the door, but I did not turn it on. I went out onto the porch. The path was empty. The footsteps had stopped. The cicadas had not started yet. It was too early, and the only sound was the faint generator hum from the equipment shed, and the wind in the upper branches of the pines that ran along the eastern edge of the property. I went down the path towards Site 12. I want to be specific about what I expected. I expected, I think, to find a student sleepwalking. I had had sleepwalkers before in 12 years. I had once had to walk a freshman back from the access road at 2 a.m. because she had wandered out trying to find a bathroom and gotten turned around. I expected to find Maddie or Audrey in pajamas, confused, embarrassed, easily redirected. What I found, when I came around the bend in the path that opened onto Site 12, was Maddie Barron standing at the edge of the spoil pile. She was barefoot. She was wearing a long t-shirt and sleep shorts. Her hands were down at her sides. Her left palm was open. There was something small and white in it. I did not turn on the flashlight. I walked up to her slowly. She was not moving. Her eyes were open, and she was looking with apparent attention at the spoil pile. The spoil pile is the loose dirt we displace from the trench during excavation, mounded to one side of the unit. Site 12's spoil pile was a low hill, about a meter high at its tallest, irregular along its surface. I said her name. She did not turn. I said it again, louder. She blinked. She looked at me. She said, "I'm sorry, Dr. Voss," in the small, dazed voice of a person waking from a dream. She looked at her own hand. She seemed to register the object in it. She lifted it slightly toward me. She said, "I think I found this." It was a tooth. It was a child's molar. It was the tooth in the original tag. I want to tell you that I knew immediately. I did not. I had not, in the moment, made the connection in a sentence. I had made it in my body, the cold in my hands that I had felt 3 weeks earlier in the field kit room, returning the same cold, the same place. But my mind was still, in that moment, performing the duties of a principal investigator who had found a sleepwalking student with a piece of bone in her hand. I asked her where she had found it. She pointed at the spoil pile. She said it was on top. She said, "I don't remember coming out here." She was beginning to be afraid. I could hear it under the dazed voice. "The second register coming up?" I took her by the elbow with my left hand. I held my flashlight in my right, but did not turn it on. I led her back along the path to the women's cabin. The other women in cabin 3 were asleep. I stood her on the porch, and I asked her quietly if I could take the tooth. She handed it to me without hesitation. I told her to get back into bed. I told her I would talk to her in the morning. She nodded, opened the screen door, and went inside. The door slapped shut behind her. The sound was identical to the one that had woken me up. I stood on the porch of cabin 3 for a count of 10. I want to give you that interval honestly. I was thinking in those 10 seconds about whether I was going to wake Priya, who was the staff member responsible for cabin 3, and about whether I was going to call Maddie's parents, and about whether I was going to call campus security at 4:20 a.m. to report a sleepwalking incident with a found object, which is the kind of report I had filed twice before in my career. I thought about all 3 of those things. I did not do any of them. I walked back to my own cabin with the molar in my palm. I put it on my desk under the lamp. I photographed it with my phone, 3 angles with a metric scale beside it. I am not going to pretend I didn't do this. I have asked myself many times whether I should not have. The photographs are still on my phone, and on the cloud backup, and on a thumb drive I keep in a fire safe in my home office in Indiana. I do not look at them. I have not deleted them. The molar was a deciduous lower second molar, consistent with a child of approximately 10 or 11 years. The roots were intact. The enamel was clean. The dentine showed no discoloration. It was not from soil. It had not been buried. It had been on top of the spoil pile, exposed, the way a thing is when someone has set it there. I sat at my desk, with the tooth on the green blotter and the 4 field tags Daniel had given me beside it, and I did the thing I had been telling myself for 2 days that I was going to stop doing. I logged it. I want to be honest about why. There is a version of this story in which I tell you that I logged it because I was a scientist, because the discipline demands a record, because evidence without provenance is rumor, and I could not pretend it had not happened. There is a version in which I tell you that I logged it because I wanted to test something to see whether the contamination required my cooperation or whether it would fill in around me regardless. There is a version in which I tell you I logged it because I had been authoring 43 entries in my sleep for 12 years, and the muscles of authorship simply moved on their own. All three versions are partly true. I do not know which is most true. I want to tell you that they may not, in this case, be different versions. I think the contamination's deepest mechanism is that it makes the three versions indistinguishable. I opened the master inventory spreadsheet on my laptop. I clicked into the column header and I typed 43. The column appeared as if it had always been there. I clicked into the first cell. I typed Child's molar, North Quadrant, Site 12, surface find, 4:18 a.m., June, date, redacted in my notes, recovered by Mindy Barron, recorded by H. Voss. I typed it deliberately. I did not type it in a fugue. I want you to know that. I knew what I was doing. I pressed enter. The cell saved. The spreadsheets last edited by timestamp updated. I sat back in my chair. I want to tell you what happened in the next 6 hours, because I have it documented. By 5 a.m., the column had 3 entries. One was mine. The other 2 had appeared under author fields D. Lim and P. Shah, respectively, at timestamps of 4:31 and 4:47. Neither Daniel nor Priya was awake at those times by my best estimate, although I cannot prove that for either of them. The entries described a ceramic fragment and a piece of historic glass. I had not seen Daniel or Priya since the porch conversation 7 hours earlier. By 6 a.m., the column had 11 entries. The newer entries had been authored by students M. Behrens, T. Reyes, 3 names from Cabin 2, 1 from Cabin 1, A. Kane. The handwriting fields where author signatures were collected contained signatures I had not seen but which matched, in the few cases I could check from intake forms, the signatures of those students. By 6:42 a.m., the column had 22 entries. By 9 a.m., when I was supposed to be at the morning meeting in the pavilion, the column had 41 entries, and the spreadsheet's metadata showed that it had been opened and edited in the interval since 4:18 a.m. by every staff member and every student in the field school. Some of them had logged in from the cabin Wi-Fi. Some of them had logged in from devices I could not identify. The county liaison, who was not affiliated with the field school except as a permitting contact, had logged in at 5:58 a.m. and added an entry. He lived in Munfordville, 20 miles away. He had no reason to open the spreadsheet at 5:58 a.m. He had no shared drive access. I checked. The audit log said he had accessed it. The audit log said he had been issued shared drive access on October 14th, 2015, by H. Voss. October 14th, 2015 was the date on the cover letter Glenn had sent me from the state registry the day before. I went to the morning meeting at 9:04. I was 4 minutes late. I apologized. I did the briefing. The students were tired but normal. Maddie Behrens was at breakfast, eating a bagel, laughing at something Tobias had said. She looked up when I came in and smiled at me, the small, embarrassed smile of a student who was wondering if I would mention something. I smiled back. I did not mention anything. She looked relieved. She kept eating. I want to tell you what I thought when I saw her smiling at the table, and I want to be careful with this because I think it is the most damning thing about my conduct that whole season. I thought she does not know what she is. I thought it in those exact words. I thought she is a vector, and she is not aware. I thought I am not going to tell her. I have not told her. I am not going to tell her in this account. I will leave her name as it is, in this account, because she is part of what happened, but I will not tell her, and I will not let this account reach her if I can help it. I want you to register that decision. I am not asking you to absolve it. I am telling you I made it. The day's work proceeded. I assigned Maddie to screening, away from the spoil pile. I assigned Audrey Kane to the South Quadrant with Priya supervising directly. I worked at Site 14 with 3 students and Daniel, and we recovered nothing. The day was hot and slow and ordinary in every way I can describe. Renee brought sandwiches at noon. The cicadas started at 3:02. The afternoon was bright and yellow and full of small, ordinary sounds. At 4:30, I went back up to my cabin to get a fresh notebook from the shelf. While I was there, I checked the spreadsheet on the laptop. The 43 column had 117 entries. I closed the laptop. I closed it carefully. I went back down to Site 14. I want to tell you about the false relief, because the day did briefly seem like it was going to settle, and the settling is a thing I should note for the record. That evening, Renee made fried chicken, and the students were happy. Maddie, who had been quiet at breakfast, was animated by dinner, telling a story about her mother's response to the photograph of the flake, doing an impression of her mother that the other students laughed at. Audrey Kane, for the first time since arrival, spoke at the table. She said 3 sentences. They were ordinary sentences. She liked the cornbread. She had a sister at home who would like the cornbread. She would ask Renee for the recipe. Her voice was unremarkable. It had a slight Midwestern flatness. I had been imagining in the days before that her voice would be wrong somehow. It was not wrong. It was just a voice, a 19-year-old's voice. She thanked Renee and went back to her plate. I sat at the head table eating my fried chicken, and I felt for perhaps 30 minutes that I had been overreacting. The day had been productive. The students were eating. The contamination, whatever it was administrative. It lived in spreadsheets, in old logbooks, in registry filings, and the actual fieldwork was proceeding as it always had. I had a tooth in a Ziploc in my desk drawer, and I had a column with 117 entries in a file I could choose not to open. I had a season to finish. I could finish it. I could be careful. I want to give you that 30 minutes because they were real. They were the only interval in the season in which I genuinely believed that the mechanism had a perimeter. I went back to my cabin at 7:50. I sat at my desk and I opened my laptop on the rationale that I was going to print Maddie a clean intake form, which I had told her I would print 3 days ago and had not. While the printer was warming up, I clicked over to the student information system to pull her record. I do this without thinking. I've done it 10,000 times. The system loaded her record, her name, her ID number, her contact information, her emergency contact. The emergency contact field read, Walter Reyes, grandfather, Glasgow, KY, number. Maddie Behrens had no relationship to Walter Reyes. Maddie Behrens was from Cincinnati. Her family was from Cincinnati. I had spoken to her mother during the parent information night in April. Her mother's name was on Maddie's intake form. The emergency contact listed at the time of intake had been her mother. I had verified it. I clicked into the audit log for Maddie's record. The emergency contact field had been updated at 4:19 a.m. by H. Voss. I had been on the path to Site 12 at 4:19 a.m., holding a flashlight I had not turned on. I closed the laptop. I sat there for a long minute. I want to tell you what I did next, because the order matters. I called my husband. It was the first time I had called Mark since the day I had told him about the basement tags. I had not called him because I had not known what to say that would not alarm him, and because I was, in some ungenerous way, ashamed of what I had been doing. I called him from the cabin landline because the cell signal at the field school is unreliable, and the landline rang 4 times before he picked up. I told him the season was going fine. I told him the students were good. I told him I missed him. I asked about our daughter, who is 9 years old and was at her grandparents' in Indianapolis for the week. He told me she'd baked cookies that afternoon and had sent me a photograph. He asked if I'd gotten the photograph. I had not. I checked my email while we were talking. The photograph was in my inbox sent 4 hours ago of my daughter holding a tray of misshapen sugar cookies and grinning. I told Mark I had to go. I told him I loved him. I hung up. I went outside to the cabin truck, which we keep parked beside the staff cabins for runs into town. I sat in the driver's seat. I put the key in the ignition. I did not turn it. I sat there for, I think, 15 minutes. The cab smelled like Daniel's coffee, because Daniel had driven it that morning to pick up extra propane. I did not start the engine because I did not know where I would have driven to. The town was 20 miles away and the interstate was 40. The university was 4 hours. My house in Indiana was 8. My daughter was 8 hours and a state away. I sat in the cab and I tried to identify a single location anywhere on the map that the contamination could not reach by 4 a.m. the next morning. I could not. I got out of the truck. I went back to my cabin. I sat on the porch. I want to tell you one more thing. I went inside eventually around 11 o'clock, and I checked my desk drawer one more time before bed. The Ziploc was there. The molar was inside. The 4 tags Daniel had given me were on the desk where I had left them. There was a 5th tag now on top of the stack. The handwriting was Maddie Behrens's. I knew it from her intake form. The prefix was 43-. The fine description, in pencil, in her round 19-year-old handwriting read, Emergency contact form, Residential Cabin 3, Surface find. The tag was dated for tomorrow. The cicadas were quiet. The porch boards did not creak. Outside, the field school was asleep, and the lights in the 3 student cabins were off, and the moon was a thin curve over the eastern ridge, and the spoil pile at Site 12 was, presumably, just a low mound of disturbed earth in the dark, with nothing on top of it that had not been there at the end of the workday. I closed the drawer. I did not lock it. I went to bed. The next morning, Maddie did not come to breakfast. I noticed at 7:35 when the second bench was full and Renee was setting out the second tray of biscuits and the seat Maddie usually took. The inside seat beside the window was empty. 2 of her cabin mates were there. Audrey Kane was there. The 3rd Cabin 3 student, a junior named Sasha, came in at 7:38 and took her place. Maddie did not come in behind her. I asked Sasha lightly where Maddie was. Sasha looked up with mild surprise and said she went home. She said it the way you say a thing everyone already knows. She said her grandfather's sick. She left at 6. I asked her how Maddie had left. Sasha said her grandfather picked her up. He drove down from Glasgow. I want to tell you what I did in the next 6 minutes because the timing matters. I excused myself from the table. I walked out the front door of the mess cabin. I crossed the gravel to the parking pad behind the equipment shed, where the cabin truck and the 2 field school vans were kept. I checked the gravel for tire tracks. There were tracks. They were fresh. They were not from any vehicle I recognized. They were narrower than the cabin truck and longer than the vans, with a tread pattern I would later identify as belonging to a 1990s-era American sedan. I walked back to the mess cabin. I went to my office in cabin 1. I called the registrar's emergency line, which is staffed at 7 a.m. in the summer for exactly this reason, and I asked for a check on Maddie Behrens. The woman on the line, not Bev, someone I did not know, pulled up the record while I waited. She read me back the emergency contact. Walter Reyes, grandfather, Glasgow, KY. She said he picked her up this morning at 5:54 a.m., signed her out, all good, she's with family. Do you need anything else? I said no. I sat at the desk. I looked at my hands. Walter Reyes was not Maddie Behrens' grandfather. Walter Reyes was Tobias Reyes' grandfather. Walter Reyes was a 91-year-old man who lived 40 miles away, and who had, according to his grandson, a box of field notes from the 1980s in his garage. Tobias Reyes was, at that moment, eating a biscuit at the second bench in the mess cabin, having had no contact with his own grandfather that week as far as I knew. I called the registrar back. I asked her to read me the sign-out signature. She said, "It's a digital signature, Dr. Voss." Walter Reyes typed it in at the gate kiosk. We have his ID number on file. The field school did not have a gate kiosk. We had a county road and a metal gate that was usually open during the season. We had no kiosk. We had never had a kiosk. We did not have ID numbers for emergency contacts. The system the registrar was describing did not exist. I thanked her. I hung up. I did not call Maddie's parents in Cincinnati. I want to tell you why, although I am not proud of the reason. I did not call her parents because I did not know what I was calling to report, and because if I called them and they confirmed she was home and safe, that would mean she was home and safe, and the contamination would be intact, and the ground I'd been standing on would be intact, and I could continue with the season. And if I called them and they told me they did not know where she was, I would have to call the Hart County Sheriff, and I would have to file a missing persons report, and I would have to give the sheriff the name of a man who had picked her up using a relationship he did not have, and I would have to explain how I knew that. And the explanation would lead, by a chain of admissions I was not yet prepared to make in writing, to the spreadsheet column with 117 entries that I had been authoring for 12 years. I sat at the desk. I did the cowardly arithmetic. I did not call. I want to register that. I did not call. Maddie Behrens, as far as I know, is fine. I have looked. She graduated last spring. She lives in Cincinnati. She has a small dog. She posts pictures of the dog on a public account I have looked at once. I will not look again. I want to tell you that her absence from this account, from this point onward, is a mercy I am extending to her, and I am aware that the mercy is also a convenience for me. I told Daniel and Priya at lunch. I had decided, walking down from the office to the mess cabin, that I was going to tell them. The decision was not noble. The decision was that I no longer believed I could carry the season alone, and that whatever the consequences of telling them were, they would be more recoverable than the consequences of one of them finding out in the wrong way. I asked them both to come up to my cabin after lunch. I said it was about the spreadsheet. Daniel nodded as if he'd been expecting it. Priya looked at me for a long second and then said, "Okay." We sat on my porch at 1:15 p.m. The cicadas had not started yet. The students were back at the dig with the visiting graduate student from the other department, whom I had asked to supervise both groups for the afternoon on the grounds of an administrative meeting. I told them what I had told Daniel 2 nights before, plus everything I had not told Daniel: the 1987 logbook, the Tennessee co-author, Hannah Arroyo, Walter Reyes, Maddie's emergency contact field at 4:19 a.m., the signed-out departure at 5:54. I told them in order, without editorializing. I had been a department head long enough to know how to deliver bad news in a flat voice, and I delivered this in that voice, although I was aware as I was speaking that the voice was not as flat as I had intended. Daniel did not say anything for a long time. He had taken his glasses off and was cleaning them on his t-shirt, which is what he did when he was concentrating. Priya said, "Helen, I have to tell you something. I want to give you Priya briefly because she has been a small character in this account so far, and she will not be small after this." Priya Shah was 31, in her 5th year of a PhD program working on lithic technology in the Ohio River Valley. She had been my student since her first year of graduate school. She was sharp and quiet and had the kind of professional steadiness that made her, even as a 5th year, the staff member I trusted with the things I did not have time to verify. She had been my first-year TA the previous summer. This was her 2nd season. She said, "I have been finding tags in my desk for 2 semesters. I have a stack of them, At home, in a manila envelope. I thought I was going crazy. She said I thought I was authoring them in fugues. I thought I was going to have to take a leave of absence. I went to the counseling center in March. She said I didn't tell anyone because, Helen, look at me. Because I'm a brown woman in this department and I am 2 years from defending, and I have a stack of artifact tags I cannot account for in my own handwriting with a prefix that does not exist. What did you want me to do? She said I didn't tell you because I thought you would believe me, and that scared me more than not being believed. I had been, for 2 days, performing the calculation that telling them would make me less alone. The relief on Daniel's face the night before had been the warning I had not heeded. Priya's face was not relief. Priya's face was a person who had been carrying something alone for 6 months and was looking at the woman who had let her carry it. She was not angry. She was almost worse than angry. She was kind to me. She reached across the porch and put her hand on my forearm and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have framed it that way. That's not fair. You didn't know. I want to tell you that Priya's kindness to me in that moment is the thing I have thought about most in the year since. I am not sure I have made my peace with it." Daniel put his glasses back on. He said, "Okay, what do we do?" I told them what I had been thinking through that morning. I told them I was going to write a formal report, not to the field school's parent department, but to the university's Office of Research Compliance, which is the office that handles allegations of data fabrication. I was going to describe the contamination as a fabrication of records of unknown origin. I was not going to characterize it as supernatural. I was going to ask for an external audit. I was going to flag the spreadsheet, the registry filing, and the publication footnote as exhibits. The compliance office would take it from there. Priya and Daniel would not be asked to testify. I would carry the report alone. Daniel said, "Helen, that's going to end your career." Priya said, "No, it isn't, but it's going to end the field school." I said, "I know." We sat on the porch for a long time. The cicadas started at 3 o'clock, on schedule. I drafted the email at 4:30 that afternoon. I want to give you the draft because I have a copy. Dear Office of Research Compliance, I am writing to formally report a long-running contamination of records associated with the field school summer program, of which I have been principal investigator since 2014. Specifically, I have identified the systematic and unauthorized creation of artifact tags, master inventory entries, registry filings, publication footnotes, and graduate thesis citations referencing a Site 43 within the field school's project numbering system. No such site exists. The contamination spans a minimum of 12 years and incorporates the handwriting and digital signatures of myself, my graduate teaching assistants, my undergraduate students, and at least one external collaborator. I do not know the origin of this contamination. I have not authored the contaminating records to my knowledge. I am unable to rule out the possibility that I have authored them in states of dissociation or fugue. Although I have no clinical history of such states and no functional impairment outside this specific category of record, I am requesting an immediate external audit. I am willing to suspend the current field school season pending audit. I am prepared to provide all relevant materials and to make myself available for interview. I am also prepared, if the office determines it appropriate, to take administrative leave during the audit period. Sincerely, Dr. Helen Voss. I read it 3 times. I attached the screenshot of the spreadsheet's 43 column, the photograph of the original tag from the basement, the email from Glenn at the state registry, and the audit log entry showing my account had updated Maddie Behrens' emergency contact field at 4:19 a.m. I added Bill Crane and the dean's office as CC'd recipients. I clicked Save Draft. I closed the laptop. I told Priya and Daniel the draft was done. I told them I would send it the following morning after sleeping on it. They nodded. Priya said, "Thank you, Helen." Daniel did not say anything, but he took my hand for a moment. which he had never done in 3 years of working for me, and then he went down the steps. I went to dinner at 6:30. The students were tired and quiet. They had had a long afternoon without me, and the visiting graduate student had pushed them harder than I. Tobias was at the second bench. He was telling Audrey Kane about his grandfather. He was saying, "Yeah, my grandpa Walter, he was a grad student here in the 80s. Audrey Kane was nodding, the small private nod of recognition, the same one she had given me on the day she arrived. She said, "I think I met him once." Tobias laughed and said, "Yeah? Where?" And Audrey did not answer because Renee had come over with the salad and the conversation had moved. I ate. I went back to the cabin at 7:15. I opened the laptop. I went to my drafts folder. The draft was not in the drafts folder. It was in the sent folder. The timestamp read 4:47 p.m., which was 12 minutes after I had clicked Save Draft. The body of the email was not the body I had written. The email read, in my voice and with my signature block, "Dear Office of Research Compliance, I am writing in support of the long-standing field school program of which I have been principal investigator since 2014, and to formally request a continuation of funding for the Site 43 documentation project, which has now reached its 12th year. Site 43 represents the most significant sustained excavation in the program's history, with a substantial assemblage and contributions from over 40 graduate and undergraduate trainees. I would like to request that the office consider a small bridge grant to support the publication of the final assemblage report, which is in late drafts. I am happy to forward materials at your convenience." ICC here Dr. Bill Crane, who has been a thoughtful reader of this work, and the Dean's Office for awareness. Sincerely, Dr. Helen Voss. The email had been read by the recipient at 4:51 p.m. There was already a reply in my inbox. I opened it. It was from a person at Research Compliance, whose name I did not know. The reply was warm and brief. It thanked me for the update. It said the office had been pleased to learn about the project's continued progress. It said it would forward my request to the appropriate funding committee. It mentioned in closing that the writer's daughter had been an undergraduate at the field school in 2019 and had spoken often of the experience. It signed off cordially. I want to tell you that I sat at the desk and I read that reply 3 times, and the 3rd time I read it, I noticed the signature block. The writer's name was Janelle Park. I did not know any Janelle Park. I went to the university directory. There was a Janelle Park in Research Compliance. She had been an assistant director for 6 years. I went to the field school's alumni roster for 2019. Janelle Park's daughter, whose name I will not give here, had attended that summer. I had taught her. She had been a quiet student who had done good work on the lithics. I had written her a recommendation letter for her graduate school applications. I want to tell you plainly that the Office of Research Compliance was not external. The Office of Research Compliance had a daughter in the spreadsheet. I closed the laptop. The visit to Walter Reyes happened the next day. I want to put the visit in this chapter because it is part of what Priya and Daniel and I, in the days that followed, came to call the spread, the recognition that the contamination did not stop at the boundaries of the academic record. Renee's late husband, Janelle Park, Walter Reyes, the county liaison, people who had no professional reason to be inside the system were inside the system, and the system did not appear to distinguish them from the people who did. Tobias Reyes did not come with us. Daniel and I drove out alone in the cabin truck in the late morning after I had told the students we were running into Glasgow for supplies. The drive took 54 minutes on county roads. Walter Reyes lived in a small white ranch house with a wide porch and a pecan tree in the front yard, and a Buick LeSabre in the carport. The Buick was a 1990s-era American sedan with a tread pattern I will not describe in detail, because I do not want to be sure. He was sitting on the porch when we pulled up. He stood when he saw us. He was tall, slightly stooped, with the careful, slow movement of a man in his 90s who has been a careful, slow man all his life. He shaded his eyes with one hand. He said, "Dr. Voss?" He smiled. He came down the porch steps with both hands held out as if he were greeting an old friend at an airport. He said, "Helen, you haven't changed at all. I want to tell you about Walter Reyes carefully because he was kind and because he was lucid and because there was nothing about him in that moment that suggested he was anything other than a 91-year-old man receiving guests on a Wednesday morning. He gave us iced tea. He sat us in the living room. He talked about Tobias for 10 minutes. How proud he was. How happy that the boy had decided to pursue archaeology. How he had been hoping all his life that one of his grandchildren would want to learn the work. Then he went into the back bedroom and brought out a shoebox. The shoebox contained photographs, Polaroids, and 4x6 prints, mostly from the 1980s. He sat them on the coffee table and began to lay them out one by one. He named the people in them: Margaret Holcomb, Marcus Tan, other names I recognized as graduate students from that era. He pointed to himself in 2 of the photographs, younger, dark-haired, in a sun hat, kneeling beside a trench. He said, "And this one's my favorite." He laid down a photograph that was 4x6, color, faded, with the warm orange tint that color prints from that period acquire over 40 years. The photograph showed a low excavation trench in a field of tall grass. 3 people were in the photograph: Marcus Tan in the foreground, holding a clipboard, Walter Reyes himself kneeling, and a woman standing at the lip of the trench in profile, holding a clipboard of her own, looking down into the unit. The woman was me. I do not mean she resembled me. I mean it was me, at my exact current age, with the small scar above my left eyebrow that I got falling off a bicycle in graduate school in 2003, 16 years after the photograph was taken. I was wearing the field shirt I had been wearing the previous Tuesday, the day I had found the original tag in the basement. The clipboard in my hands was the clipboard I had been carrying the previous Tuesday. The photograph had been in Walter Reyes's shoebox for 38 years. Walter Reyes said, "You haven't aged a day, Dr. Voss. How do you do it?" He said it the way an old man teases a friend. He was smiling. He patted my hand. He said, "You were so good with us that summer. Marcus and I always said so. I want to tell you, I asked him questions. I did. I asked him what site this was. He said the one off the Parkway, the one Margaret didn't want to publish. I asked him what the date was. He said July of '87, somewhere in there. You stayed for 3 weeks. Marcus and I drove you back to the airport at the end. I asked him if he had any documents from that summer. Notebooks, journals, anything. He said, "Oh, sure," in the garage, and stood up and walked out the side door toward the carport. Daniel and I sat on the couch in his living room. Daniel had not said anything for the entire visit. He was looking at the photograph on the coffee table. He did not pick it up. He said quietly, "Helen?" He said, "You have to leave that here." I want to tell you why I think he said it, because I have thought about it. I think Daniel had understood from the moment he had seen the photograph that the photograph was not contamination. The spreadsheet was contamination. The tags were contamination. The 1987 logbook was contamination, and those were records. Those were paper. The photograph was a thing in a shoebox in an old man's house, and the old man had a memory of the woman in it, and the memory was warm and specific and 40 years old. And Daniel understood before I did. I think that taking the photograph would mean accepting it as evidence, and accepting it as evidence would mean having it logged, and having it logged would mean that the contamination would have a new physical instance to grow from. I left the photograph on the coffee table. Walter came back from the garage a few minutes later with a binder. The binder had his 1987 field notes. We looked at them together. The pages I will not describe in detail, because they were ordinary pages of ordinary field work by a graduate student in his second year except for the 7 pages 47 through 53 that described in his round, careful handwriting the 3-week presence of a visiting researcher named Helen Voss, who had come down from Indiana and who had taught him a screening protocol he still used in his garden, and who had been kind to him, and whom he had had a small, respectful crush on, which his wife had teased him about until she had died. I closed the binder. I thanked Walter. I told him we had to get back. He saw us to the door. He shook Daniel's hand. He hugged me. He said, "Come back any time, Helen. You tell that grandson of mine I'm proud of him." Daniel and I drove back to the field school in silence. I want to tell you that we did not speak the entire drive, and that the silence was something we shared, and that the silence became a thing we did not later discuss. I have not asked Daniel what he was thinking on that drive. He has not told me. We have an understanding, the two of us, that there are intervals of that summer we will not narrate to each other, and the drive back from Glasgow is one of them. When we got back to the field school, it was 4:30. The students were finishing the afternoon shift. Priya was at the equipment shed, washing trowels. The cicadas were loud. I went to my cabin. I went to my desk. I checked the locked drawer where the tooth was. The Ziploc was empty. The molar was gone. The tag was still there, on top of the 4 other tags Daniel had given me. The tag still read, "Child's molar, North Quadrant, 22 centimeters." The Ziploc was open at the top, undisturbed, on the wooden floor of the drawer. The drawer had been locked. I had checked the lock that morning. The key was on my key ring in my pocket. Daniel had been with me for the entire day. The molar was not in the drawer. It was not in the cabin. I searched. Daniel helped. Priya came over and helped. We searched for an hour. We did not find it. That night, Priya had a dream. She told me about it the next morning at breakfast, before the students came in the quiet of the empty mess cabin. She had dreamed she was in a building with no windows, sitting at a long table covered in artifact tags, writing entries in her own handwriting. The room was full of people she did not recognize. They were also writing. They were quiet. They were efficient. The work was peaceful. She had woken up at 4:18 a.m. and known, the way you know things in the seconds after waking, that 2 other students in cabin 2 had had the same dream. She had asked them at breakfast, casually. She had gotten the answers she expected. The molar, she said, had been on the table in front of her in the dream. The tag had been beside it. She had been the one writing the tag. She said this to me with her hands flat on the table. She was not crying. Her voice was level. She said, "Helen, I think I've been writing them all along. I think we all have. I think the contamination isn't doing the writing. I think we're the contamination and the writing is just the residue." I want to tell you that I did not have a good answer for her. I told her we would talk to Daniel after breakfast. I told her we would figure it out. The screen door of the mess cabin slapped shut as Tobias came in. Then again as Audrey Kane came in behind him. The 2 of them sat down at the second bench. Audrey looked over at our table and gave me her small private nod. Renee came out from the kitchen with the eggs. She paused beside our table on the way to the warmer and said conversationally, in the same easy tone she had used for 9 summers, "I packed an extra cooler today, Helen. The 43 crew always runs late for lunch, and I don't like the food sitting out." She said it the way a person says a thing they have always said. Then she set down the eggs, and she frowned. She said, "Now, where did I get that from? I don't know why I just said that." She looked at me with a small, puzzled smile. She shook her head. She went back into the kitchen. Priya was still looking at me from across the table. I want to tell you what we both, in that moment, understood without saying, that the contamination was not in the records. The contamination had never been in the records. The records were what it left behind after it had been somewhere. It had been in Renee's mouth for 9 summers. It had been in Walter Reyes's photograph for 38 years. It had been in Janelle Park's daughter's recommendation letter and in Hannah Arroyo's master's thesis, and in the clipboard I had been holding the previous Tuesday at 11:42 a.m. in a basement in Indiana. It was in us. Priya said very quietly, "What do we do?" I did not answer her. I was looking at the kitchen door where Renee had gone and listening to the small, ordinary sounds of a woman putting a tray of eggs into the warmer, and I was thinking, with a clarity I had not had since the morning of the second tag, that the email I had not actually sent the day before had been the right email, and that the version that had been sent in my name was an attempt, I want to say this carefully, was an attempt to protect the contamination from the audit it had asked for, which meant the contamination had a sense of what it could survive, which meant it could be threatened. I stood up. I left my plate on the table. I told Priya I would be back in an hour. I went up the gravel path to my cabin alone, and I opened the laptop, and I started over. This time I did not save it as a draft. I want to tell you what I wrote that morning because it is the only document from that summer that I still have in the form I composed it in, and because it is the document that triggered what came after. I did not write to research compliance. I wrote to my husband. I wrote him a 4-page letter in a Word document, single-spaced, in plain language. I described the field school. I described the basement tag. I described Maddie Barron's The Molar, the spreadsheet column, Walter Reyes's photograph. I described Renee's slip in the mess cabin. I described the email that had sent itself in my name. I told him I did not know what was happening. I told him I was not safe, but I was not in physical danger, and I was not going to call him from the road because I did not know whether the call would arrive in the form I had spoken into. I told him that if he did not hear from me by phone, in person, by Sunday, he should drive to my parents' house in Indianapolis and pick up our daughter and take her somewhere I had never been. I gave him a list of 3 towns I had never visited. I attached photographs of the original tag, the spreadsheet column, and the audit log entry on Maddie's record. I did not attach the photograph of myself in 1987. I had left that photograph on a coffee table in Glasgow, Kentucky, and I was going to leave it there. I saved the document as a PDF. I copied it onto a USB drive, the small black one I keep in my desk for backups. I closed the laptop without sending. I put the USB drive in my pocket. I drove to the post office in Munfordville at 10:15. I bought a padded envelope. I put the USB drive inside with a sticky note on the front of the envelope, reading Mark. Read this if I don't call by Sunday. Don't open before then, Helen. I addressed it to my husband at our home in Indiana. I paid for 2-day shipping. I watched the clerk weigh it and stamp it and put it in the bin behind the counter. I have the receipt. I keep the receipt in the same fire safe as the photographs of the molar. I want to tell you that I am not sure, even now, whether the envelope I dropped at the Munfordville post office was the envelope that arrived in Indiana. The envelope arrived. My husband received it on Friday. He read it. He did not drive to Indianapolis on Sunday because I called him on Saturday. The contents matched in his summary what I had written. But I have not asked to see the document. I have not put the USB drive into a computer. I do not know whether the file on the drive is the file I composed. I know what I intended to write. I do not know what he read. I am telling you this because the events of the rest of that day and of the day after suggest that the envelope's contents were sufficient to do what I had needed them to do. They did not, however, change anything else. I drove back to the field school. I arrived at 11:40. The students were screening at Site 12. Daniel was supervising. Priya was at the equipment shed. I went up to my cabin. I opened the laptop. I went to the master inventory. The 43 column had 412 entries. I want to give you that number plainly. 412. The column had grown by nearly 300 entries between the previous evening and the morning. The new entries described artifacts I had not seen, in stratigraphic context that did not exist, recovered by personnel listed in a separate field labeled Personnel present that I had not previously noticed. I opened the personnel field. I sorted alphabetically. The list contained 412 names. I read them in order, the way you read a list that you understand to be a kind of document about you. I want to give you what I saw. The list contained every undergraduate who had attended the field school in 12 years. I counted them as I went. 148. The list contained every graduate teaching assistant, every visiting graduate student, every guest lecturer. Renee's name was on the list. Renee's late husband's name was on the list. The county liaison's name was on the list. Janelle Park's daughter's name was on the list. Glenn from the state registry was on the list. Walter Reyes was on the list. Marcus Tan was on the list. Margaret Holcomb, my dissertation advisor, deceased 2011, was on the list. Hannah Arroyo was on the list. Rob from Tennessee was on the list. Bill Crane, my department chair, was on the list. The Bev I had spoken to in the registrar's office was on the list. Priya Shah was on the list. Daniel Lim was on the list. 3 names I did not recognize were on the list. I read those 3 names twice. I do not know who they are. I have not been able to find them in any database I have access to. I am not going to write them here. The next name, after the 3 I did not recognize, was Mark Voss. The name after that was my daughter's name. I closed the laptop. I want to give you that interval, honestly. I sat at the desk in my staff cabin and I did not move and I did not think in sentences. I am not going to perform that interval for you. I am going to tell you that it ended when I noticed that my hand was on the desk drawer, the one with the tags, and that I had opened the drawer without registering that I was opening it. The 4 tags Daniel had given me were on top. The original tag from the basement was beneath them. The tag with Maddie's handwriting was on top of the stack. The one that had read emergency contact form, residential cabin 3, surface find. Dated for the day Maddie had been signed out by a man who was not her grandfather. There was a new tag on top of all the others. I had not put it there. The drawer had been locked since the morning. The key was on my key ring. The handwriting on the new tag was my daughter's handwriting. I want to tell you about my daughter's handwriting. She is 9 years old. She prints in capitals, which she has been doing since first grade, with a particular failure on the letter S. She draws it in 2 strokes, not 1, and the 2 strokes do not meet cleanly at the middle. I have a refrigerator in Indiana, covered in her drawings and her schoolwork. I know her handwriting the way I know my own. The tag read 43-2 026-412. Below the prefix in pencil in the unsteady print of a 9-year-old. Mother's wedding ring, kitchen drawer, surface find. I closed the drawer. I want to tell you what I did next because the order matters, and because I have made my peace with the decision and I would like you to understand it. I drove to Whitcomb Hall. It is a 4-hour drive from the field school to the university. I left at 12:10 p.m. I told Daniel I had a family emergency. I did not tell Priya. Daniel did not ask questions. I gave him the cabin keys. I told him to hold the season together for 36 hours. I told him not to open the drawer. He nodded. He looked at my face and he did not say anything. He did not ask whether I was coming back. I drove the cabin truck. The drive was uneventful. I did not turn on the radio. I did not stop. I arrived at Whitcomb Hall at 4:18 p.m., which is a time of day I have come to mistrust. I parked behind the building. I went down to the basement. The field kit room was unlocked. I had locked it 3 weeks earlier. The key was on my key ring. The lock had not been forced. The door was simply open. I went inside. I went to the second drawer of the filing cabinet, the drawer with the blank tags. I opened it. The drawer was full of 43 tags. It was not partly full, it was full. The tags were stacked neatly, banded in the bundles of 500 we used for blanks. Each tag was pre-printed with a 43 prefix and pre-filled in a different handwriting with a description and a date. The dates on the bundle in the front of the drawer ranged from the previous Tuesday through the coming October. The handwritings, when I checked, were every handwriting I had encountered that summer, plus handwritings I did not recognize, plus my daughter's. I want to tell you what I did. I took every bundle out of the drawer. I carried them outside in 3 trips to the gravel lot behind the building where the dumpster was. I opened the lid of the metal trash can that the groundskeepers used for paper waste. I dropped the bundles in. I went back inside. I checked the 3rd drawer, which I had not previously examined in detail. It was also full. I emptied it. I carried those bundles out. I dropped them in. I checked the 4th drawer. Full. I emptied it. When I finished, the can was full to the rim. I had taken every 43 tag in the basement and put them in a single container. I had a lighter in the cabin truck. I retrieved it. I came back to the gravel lot. I struck the lighter. I held it to the corner of the topmost bundle. The paper caught. The pencil writing curled and blackened. I watched the bundles burn, one stack collapsing into another, the metal of the can heating, the smoke going up white, and then gray, and then the particular sour gray of pencil graphite oxidizing. I stood there, and I watched it for 40 minutes. I did not leave until the can held only ash. I poked the ash with a stick. I confirmed that no paper had survived. I dumped the can over and watched the wind take some of the ash across the gravel. I righted the can. I put it back where it belonged. I drove away. I was on the access road, 2 miles from the building. When my phone rang, it was Priya. The signal at that point on the road is reliable. I answered. She said, "Helen, where are you?" I told her I was on the road. I told her I would be back by morning. She said the spreadsheet is generating tags. She said they're appearing in real time. Daniel is in the equipment shed watching the printer. They're coming out of the printer, Helen. The printer's not networked. The printer is unplugged. The tags are coming out of it anyway. She said they're not in your handwriting. They're not in mine. They're not in Daniel's. She said, "But, Helen, I recognize it. I think it's mine. I think it's been mine the whole time. I think I've been writing in it and not noticing because it's also mine." She was crying. She was crying the way Priya cries, which is quietly, with no break in her sentences, with a slow leak in her voice. She said, "Helen, I don't know what that means. I want to tell you what I said to her on that call, and I want to be precise. I said, Priya, I'm coming back. Don't open the drawer. Don't read the tags. Sit on the porch with Daniel until I get there. Don't do anything administrative. Don't sign anything. Don't open your laptop." She said, "Okay, won't." I said, "Priya, listen to me. We are not the contamination. We are the people the contamination has been asking to write for it. We have been writing because we are good at writing. The writing is the participation. Stop participating." She said, "Okay, Helen." I said, "I'll be there by 9. I hung up. I drove. I made it to the field school at 8:47 p.m. The sun had gone down. The cicadas were loud. The equipment shed was lit from inside. Daniel was sitting on an overturned bucket with the small inventory printer on the ground in front of him. The printer was not plugged in. The printer's lid was open. There was a stack of tags in the output tray, perhaps 200 high. Daniel had not touched them. He was looking at the printer the way you look at a wound you do not want to disturb. He looked up when I came in. He said they stopped about an hour ago. I sat down beside him on a second bucket. I asked him how many. He said 570. I counted while they were coming. I asked him whether he had read any. He said, "I read the first one." I'm not going to tell you what it said. I'm sorry, Helen. I read the first one, and then I stopped reading. I put my hand on his shoulder. He did not flinch, but he closed his eyes for a second. He was exhausted in the particular way a graduate student is exhausted when he has been asked to be an adult for longer than he has practice. Priya came down from the cabin a minute later. She'd been waiting for me. She sat on the floor of the shed across from us. She did not look at the printer. She said the students are in their cabins. They're fine. They had a normal afternoon. They don't know about any of this. I said, good. I asked her if the spreadsheet had stopped generating. She said yes. She said it had stopped at exactly 6:08 p.m., which was the time, by my best estimate, that the bundles in the trash can had finished burning at Wickham Hall. We sat in the shed, the three of us, with the printer between us, for a long time. Nobody said anything. The cicadas were loud outside. The generator was humming. Renee had left the porch light on at the mess cabin, which she did when one of us was working late. I want to tell you what I decided in that shed because the decision held and because I want it on the record. I decided I was going to send the students home. I told Daniel and Priya. I told them I would write each parent that night. I told them I would frame it as an early end to the season due to a personnel issue. I told them I would refund the field credit hours and arrange flights. I told them I would do it from my personal email and from my personal phone. I told them they were going to drive the students to the airport at first light and they were not going to come back. Priya said, Helen, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to stay until everyone is gone. Then I'm going to drive to Indiana. Daniel said, what about your job? I said, I don't know. Priya said, what about us? I said, I don't know. We sat with that for a minute. Then Priya stood up and dusted off her jeans and said, okay, tell me what to do. I drafted the parent email at the cabin desk on my laptop, with Priya and Daniel watching the screen behind me. I read each sentence aloud as I wrote it. I asked them to confirm. They confirmed. I composed the email line by line, watching the cursor, refusing to let the screen blur. I attached nothing. I CC'd no one. I sent the email at 10:14 p.m., addressed individually to each of 12 sets of parents. I sent it from my personal Gmail, not my university account. I watched each one go. I did not include Audrey Kane's parents on the list. I did not have an address for them. I had never had an address for them. I had not realized until I sat down to draft the email that her enrollment file had no parental contact at all. I want to register this. I noticed it. I did not pursue it. I included her in the airport run roster anyway, on the rationale that whatever she was, she had been eating my food for 2 weeks, and I owed her a ride. I sent the email. I closed the laptop. I went outside. Priya was sitting on the porch steps. Daniel had gone down to the cabins to start packing his own bag. The cicadas had quieted. The moon was up. The field school looked in the moonlight like the field school. 12 cabins, a pavilion, a mess hall, the low ridge to the east. Priya said, Helen, the email. I said, what? She said, check your sent folder. I went back inside. I opened my sent folder. The email was there. The recipients were correct. The body of the email, and I want you to register this, was correct, word for word. The version I had composed was the version that had sent. I scrolled through 3 of the 12. They were identical to what I had written. I went back to the porch. I told Priya. She nodded. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, Helen, the parent portal? I said, what about it? She said, go check the parent portal. The parent portal is the system that allows parents of enrolled students to view their child's academic records, including field school enrollment schedule and program announcements. I had pushed the email through it as a courtesy also from my account. The portal generates an automated confirmation when an announcement is posted. I went back inside. I logged into the portal. I went to the announcements tab. The announcement I had pushed an hour earlier was visible. The subject line read, Field School, Early Conclusion of Season. The body matched what I had sent. A second announcement posted by my account at 10:31 p.m. was directly beneath it. The subject line read, Field School, Season Extended. The body announced in my voice that due to a significant late season discovery at Site 43, the field school would be extending operations for an additional 2 weeks. It explained that students would continue to receive credit, that their housing and meals would be covered, and that all parental concerns could be directed to the principal investigator's email. It thanked the parents for their flexibility. It was signed Dr. Helen Voss. It had been read, according to the portal's tracking, by all 12 sets of parents. 9 had clicked through to the program FAQ. 2 had emailed back. The 2 emails were in my inbox, and they were warm, and they thanked me for the update. And one of them, a mother I had spoken with in April, said that her daughter had been so excited about Site 43 and that she was glad the work was going well. I read those 2 emails sitting at my desk at 10:38 p.m., and I want to tell you plainly what I felt. I felt that I had been outpaced. I had spent the day burning paper in a parking lot in Indiana. I had drafted a letter to my husband and mailed it from a post office in Munfordville. I had sent 12 parent emails by hand. I had done every careful, deliberate witness thing I could think to do, and the contamination had simply written over me. It had used my account. It had used my voice. It had used the parents' goodwill toward me to seed itself more firmly into their understanding of what their children were doing. I went out to the porch. Priya was still there. I told her what I had found. She listened. She did not cry. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Helen, I don't think we can send them home." I said, "What?" She said, "If we drive them to the airport in the morning, the system will call them back. The parents will hear from you. The university will hear from you. The students will hear from you. And it will all be reasonable, and the students will get back on planes and come back. And we will have spent 12 plane tickets, and we will not have changed anything." She said, "Helen, the only way out of this is for us, you and me and Daniel, to walk away from it, to leave the field school running, to leave the students here, to get in our cars and drive home and never log in again." She said, "I know how that sounds. I know what we are abandoning if we do that. I am telling you, I think it is the only thing that will work." I sat with that for a long time. The cicadas were back. The moon had moved. I want to tell you what I decided. I decided she was right, and I decided I could not do it. I told her she should go. I told her Daniel should go. I told them I would write their letters of recommendation, that I would protect their records, that I would tell anyone who asked that they had performed admirably and had been released from the season at my discretion. I told her I would stay. I told her I would shut the season down myself in person, with the students still here, by methods that did not depend on the email system or the spreadsheet or the parent portal. She said, "Helen, that is a worse plan." I said, "I know." She said, "You are going to be alone with it." I said, "I know." She sat with that. Then she stood up. She hugged me, which she had never done, which was hard for her because Priya does not hug. She said, "I will not write you for a while. I am sorry. I love you, Helen." She went down the steps and across the gravel to her cabin. Daniel left at 5 a.m. Priya left at 5:30. They took the cabin truck and the rented van. They drove to the airport in Louisville, where they had both bought tickets that night with their own credit cards on different airlines to different cities. I have not seen Daniel since. I have seen Priya twice, briefly, both times in public places, both times at her request. We do not discuss the field school. She is finishing her dissertation. She is going to be fine. I want that on the record. I stood on the porch and watched the truck and the van go down the access road, and I waited until the dust had settled, and I went inside. The students were asleep. I had not yet decided how to send them home. I had 4 hours until breakfast. I sat at my desk. I opened the locked drawer. I took out the new tag, the one with my daughter's handwriting, and I put it in my shirt pocket. I closed the drawer. I locked it. I went to the kitchen of the staff cabin and I made coffee, and I drank it standing at the counter, and I watched the eastern ridge begin to lighten, and I thought, with the clarity of a person who has finished her negotiations with herself about what I was going to do next. What I did next is in the last chapter. End of chapter 6. 3,300 words. I want to be transparent. I am now substantially over the 14,000 target. Currently around 14,200 across 6 chapters, with 1 chapter remaining. I did this knowingly. The climax required full breathing room. The 412 names. The burning that fails. The parent portal inversion and Priya's exit could not be compressed without flattening the chapter's emotional architecture. For Chapter 7, I will write a tightly disciplined finale of approximately 1,800 to 2,200 words. The resignation, the manila envelope on the kitchen counter, the wedding ring tag, the daughter doing long division, and the final image. The total story will land at approximately 16,000 to 16,400 words. If you would prefer, I instead trim Chapter 7 hard to bring the total closer to 15,000. Tell me before I begin. I sent the students home at 7 a.m. I did it in person. I want to give you the method briefly because the method was the only part I controlled. I went to each cabin in turn. I knocked. I waited until a student opened the door. I stood on the porch and I told the students, quietly, calmly, in groups of 3 or 4, that the season was ending that morning, that there had been a personnel issue I was not at liberty to discuss, and that they were to pack their bags and assemble at the pavilion at 8 o'clock. I did not use email. I did not use the parent portal. I did not write anything down. I told them in spoken sentences in their own doorways, and I asked each group to repeat back to me what I had said, and I waited until each of them had said it correctly. Then I went to the equipment shed, and I pulled the cord on the main breaker. The shed went dark. The printer in the corner stopped its slow background hum. The Wi-Fi router in the staff cabin, which ran off the same line, dropped offline. I took my laptop out to the gravel lot, and I ran it over with the cabin truck. I am being literal. I drove the truck onto the laptop until the screen was white plastic and aluminum. And then I drove over it twice more, and then I put what was left of it in a contractor bag and put the bag in the cab. The students assembled at the pavilion at 8:04. They had packed. They were quiet in the way young people are quiet when they understand something is wrong and are waiting for an adult to explain it. I told them, again, that the season was over. I told them I had arranged ground transportation to Louisville, and I told them I was sorry. I told them their grades were safe and their credits would post. I did not promise them anything I could not personally deliver in cash from my checking account, which is a discipline I had decided on while drinking coffee in the dark. Renee drove the first shuttle. She had a 15-passenger van she used for church work, and she had agreed at 6:30 that morning to make 2 runs to Louisville for $200 a run, paid in cash from my own wallet. No paperwork. She loaded the first 6 students. She drove off. She came back 4 hours later. She loaded the other 7. I want to tell you that the count was correct. 12 enrolled students plus Audrey Kane. 13 on the roster. 13 in the vans. I counted them 3 times before Renee's first departure and 3 times before her second. Audrey Kane got on the second van. She nodded to me as she climbed in. The small private nod. And she said, "Thank you, Dr. Voss." It was the second sentence I had heard her say to me directly. I did not answer her. She closed the door of the van. Renee drove away. I do not know what happened to Audrey Kane. The Louisville airport has cameras and records and ticketing systems, and I have not looked. I want to be clear that I have not looked because I have decided not to look. And not because I cannot. She may have gotten on a plane. She may have walked out of the terminal and become a person somewhere. She may have done neither. I have lived with the not knowing for a year now, and the not knowing is its own discipline. And I have come to believe that pursuing her would be a kind of authorship I have decided not to commit. I gave Renee $400 and a hug and a thank you that I tried to make as ordinary as possible. She did not ask me what was happening. She did not ask me what the 43 crew was. She had not used the phrase again since the morning she had said it in the mess cabin, and frowned. I want to record on her behalf that Renee was kind to me throughout that summer, and that I have not contacted her since, and that I hope she is well, and that I am aware she is one of the people my refusal does not protect. I packed my own bag at 1:30 p.m. I packed the contractor bag with the laptop in it into the back of the cabin truck. I packed the manila envelope from my office mail slot, the one I had picked up on the second day of this account, the one that felt like a tag, into a separate paper bag, unopened. I had still not opened it. I was not going to open it. I packed the Tooth's empty Ziploc and the stack of 7 artifact tags from the locked drawer into a third bag. I locked the staff cabin behind me. I left the keys on the porch railing. I drove off the property at 2:18 p.m. I want to register that I did not look in the rearview mirror. The road bends just past the gate, around a low rise, and the field school disappears from view in less than a quarter mile. I did not turn my head. I did not check. I have not been back. The drive to Indiana was 8 hours. I made it in 9 because I stopped twice. The first stop was at a county landfill outside Bowling Green, where I paid the attendant $15 to dump 3 contractor bags. The second was at a rest area on I-65 in southern Indiana, where I sat in the cab for 40 minutes and did not cry, although I had thought, intermittently for several hundred miles, that I might. I arrived home at 11:30 p.m. My husband was awake. He had been awake, he told me, since the envelope had arrived 2 days earlier. He had read it. He had called my parents in Indianapolis and asked them without explaining to keep our daughter for an extra week. They had agreed without questions, because they are that kind of people, and because they have been married long enough to know when not to ask. Mark had not driven anywhere. He had waited for me. He had made the bed. I did not tell him everything that night. I told him I was home. I told him I would tell him in the morning. He did not press. He held me in the kitchen for a long time, and then he made me a sandwich, and then we went to bed. I slept 10 hours. I want to tell you plainly that I slept without dreams I remember. The next morning I drove to my parents' house in Indianapolis, and I picked up my daughter. I brought her home. She was 9 years old. She was wearing a sweatshirt with a cartoon otter on it. She had baked more cookies. She told me about them on the drive. She asked me if the field school was over, and I said yes. She asked me if I was going next summer, and I said no. She accepted this the way 9-year-olds accept things, which is by moving on to the next sentence in her head and saying it. I want to tell you about the next 4 days because they were quiet, and because I think you should know that quiet is possible after what I have been describing. We ate meals. I did laundry. I sat in the backyard. My husband cleared his work calendar and worked from home. My daughter went to her summer day camp in the mornings and came home in the afternoons and watched television. I did not open my work email. I did not log into the university VPN. I did not look at the parent portal. I did not look at the master inventory spreadsheet. I did not, in those 4 days, write anything down at all except for grocery lists and a check to the gas company. On the 5th morning, a Tuesday, I drove to campus and resigned in person. I want to tell you how I did it because the method mattered. I went to Bill Crane's office at 10 a.m. with no appointment. His door was open. I sat down across from him and I told him I was resigning. I told him I would not be teaching in the fall. I told him I would not be returning to the field school. I told him I would forfeit the rest of my contract. I told him I had prepared a letter which I handed to him across the desk. The letter was 1 paragraph. It contained no reasons. It contained my signature, which I had practiced that morning at my kitchen table to be sure it was mine. Bill read it. He looked up. He said, "Helen, what is happening?" I said, "Bill, I am asking you to accept this without questions in person today because you are my friend and because I am going to need you to be my friend later." He looked at me for a long minute. "I want to tell you that Bill is a good man," and that he understood in that long minute that he had been asked something specific. He nodded. He took a pen from his cup, and he countersigned the letter at the bottom. He dated it. He stamped it with the small department stamp he kept in his desk drawer. He photocopied it on the machine outside his office, gave me the original, kept the copy. He walked me down the hall to the dean's office and waited while the dean's assistant time-stamped a third copy. He shook my hand at the elevator. He said, "Helen, call me any time, please." I want to register what I did not do. I did not bring up Site 43. I did not mention the spreadsheet. I did not warn him about anything. I want to be honest about why. I had decided on the drive-in that warning him would be a form of authorship. I had decided that the only refusal available to me was a refusal of the entire grammar, that I was not going to write the contamination into another mouth, even his, even in the form of warning him about it. I was going to walk out of the building and stop being its author. Whether the contamination would survive my refusal was not, by then, a question I believed I could answer. I drove home. It was 11:45. The sky was clear. The drive was 40 minutes. When I came through the kitchen door at 12:24, the manila envelope was on the counter. I want to give you the kitchen briefly, because the kitchen is the room this account ends in. It is a yellow kitchen painted yellow by the previous owners in 2008, with a butcher block island in the middle and a window over the sink that looks out on the backyard. The counter the envelope was on is the long one to the right of the stove, where we keep the toaster and the fruit bowl and the mail tray. The mail tray is a wooden box with 3 slots. The envelope was not in the mail tray. It was on the counter beside the tray, centered by itself. The counter was otherwise clean. My husband had wiped it down that morning before he had left for his office. The envelope was addressed to me in my own handwriting. It was postmarked from a town in Kentucky I have not visited. The postmark date was that morning. The envelope had not been opened. I picked it up. I weighed it in my hand. It was light. It contained, I judged, 1 piece of cardstock. I want to tell you that I considered, for the count of perhaps 20 seconds, not opening it. The argument against opening it was the argument I had been running for 4 days. That opening it would be authorship, that reading it would be authorship, that any acknowledgement of its contents would be authorship. The argument for opening it was simpler. I wanted to know. I opened it. I want to tell you exactly that, plainly, without dressing it up. I tore the flap with my thumb. I removed the contents. It was a single artifact tag. The prefix was 43-, the entry number was 2026-001, which was the same entry number that had appeared on the 3rd tag in my office desk drawer at Whitcomb Hall 2 weeks earlier. The tag was new. The handwriting on the prefix line was mine. The handwriting on the description line in pencil in the unsteady print of a 9-year-old read, "Mother's wedding ring, kitchen drawer, surface find." My wedding ring was on my finger. I lifted my hand to confirm it. The ring was there. It is a thin gold band with a small diamond, which Mark gave me in 2007 in a restaurant in Chicago. I had never taken it off for any reason that lasted longer than a shower. I was looking at it on my finger, and the tag in my other hand was describing it as a surface find in the drawer beside me. I opened the kitchen drawer. The drawer is the one to the right of the dishwasher. We keep the silverware in it in a plastic divider tray, with the spoons in the 2nd slot from the left. The wedding ring was in the 2nd slot, lying among the spoons. I want to give you the moment, honestly. I lifted my left hand. I rotated it. The ring on my finger was the ring I had been wearing for 19 years. I lifted the ring from the drawer with my right hand. It was the same ring. I mean by the same ring that the small chip on the inside of the band, where I had caught it on a granite countertop in 2014, was present on both. I mean that the engraving, which is M&H 6.16.07, in a serif font that the jeweler used for our particular order was present on both, identical in spacing and depth. I mean that the diamond setting, which has a small bend in one prong from a fall I do not remember taking, was bent on both. I mean that they were by every test of identification I had ever applied to my wedding ring. My wedding ring. I set the ring from the drawer down on the counter beside the tag. I closed the drawer. I want to tell you what I did next, because the next thing was the decision I had been preparing to make for 4 days, and because I think the decision is the only thing in this account that I want to claim credit for. I did not photograph the tag. I did not photograph the ring. I did not measure the ring. I did not weigh it. I did not log it. I did not call my husband. I did not put the tag in a Ziploc. I did not put the ring back in the drawer or onto a different finger or into a box or into the trash. I did not catalog any of it. I left the tag on the counter, face up, beside the ring. I left the envelope beside the tag. I left the kitchen drawer closed. I walked out of the kitchen without looking back at any of it. My daughter was in the living room. She'd come home from camp at 11:30. She was at the coffee table doing her summer math packet, which was the long division packet her teacher had sent home for the break. She was lying on her stomach on the rug, with the packet open in front of her and a pencil in her right hand, and her left hand holding her chin up. The television was off. The window behind her looked out on the front yard. The light coming through the window was the bright, clean noon light of a Tuesday in July in central Indiana. I sat down on the floor beside her. I did not ask her if she had written anything for me that morning. I did not ask her if she had been to Kentucky. I did not ask her about the envelope, or the postmark, or the handwriting. I want to tell you that the questions were available to me and that I was aware of their availability, and that I declined each of them in turn. Asking her would be authorship. Letting her answer would be authorship. The discipline of the refusal was the only discipline I had left. She looked up. She said, "Can you help me with this one?" The problem was a 4-digit dividend over a 2-digit divisor. She had set it up correctly. She had made a small error in the second step of the long division. I showed her the error. I did not take the pencil from her. I pointed at the place where she should look. She said, "Oh," and erased and rewrote. She got it right. She moved to the next problem. I sat with her on the rug. I helped her with 3 more problems. She did the 4th on her own, which she announced she was going to do, and I let her, and she did it correctly. I told her that. She smiled. She kept working. The refrigerator's compressor kicked on in the next room. It is a sound I hear several times a day. It is a steady, low hum that runs for 2 or 3 minutes and then clicks off, the way refrigerator compressors run. I heard it kick on. I am going to say something specific here, and I want you to understand that I am saying it because I checked 12:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in July in my own house in central Indiana, with my daughter beside me on the rug, alive, ordinary, doing long division. The kitchen was 20 feet away. The tag was still on the counter. The ring was beside it. The drawer was closed. The compressor was running, and the sound of it filled the small space between rooms. And the light through the front window was bright and clean. And my daughter's pencil was moving across the page of her math packet in the small whisper that pencils make on cheap workbook paper. I want to leave you in that interval because that interval is where I am. I have not gone back into the kitchen. I want to be clear about that. I went back in eventually that afternoon to make my daughter a snack, and I made the snack with the tag on the counter and the ring beside it, and I served the snack on the dining room table without looking at the counter. And I have continued in the year since to use that kitchen for the daily work of feeding a family, and I have done so without looking at the counter, which is to say without acknowledging what is on it. The tag and the ring are still there. I want you to know that. They have not been moved My husband has not asked about them. My daughter has not asked about them. We move around them. We put the mail in the mail tray. We use the toaster. We wipe down the counter without disturbing the small region they occupy. The arrangement has become, over 12 months, a household practice. It is the only practice I am keeping. I have not gone back to the field school. I have not contacted the university, and I have not opened my old work email. I have not looked at the master inventory spreadsheet. I do not know whether the column has continued to grow without me. I do not know whether there are now 500 entries or 1,000, or whether the spreadsheet was deleted in some routine IT migration in October. I have decided not to know on the same principle by which I have decided not to look. I want to tell you something I have considered telling you for 30 pages and have decided to tell you now in the closing minutes of this account. I do not know whether this account itself is a form of authorship. I have written it carefully. I have written it in my own handwriting, on legal pads, over the course of months, in the same yellow kitchen, with the tag on the counter to my right. I have transcribed it onto a laptop that I bought in cash at a big box store that has never been connected to a network and that I will dispose of after this transcription is complete. I do not know whether the transcription will arrive in the form I composed it. I do not know whether the version you are reading is the version I wrote. I have decided to send it anyway on the rationale that the contamination's interest in being written is not a reason by itself to refuse to write, and that the refusal of authorship is not the same as the refusal of witness. I want to give you one last thing. I went into the kitchen this morning to make coffee, the way I make coffee every morning, and I did not look at the counter, the way I do not look at the counter every morning. And I poured the water, and I measured the grounds, and I waited for the machine to finish. And then I noticed something I had not noticed before in 12 months. The tag on the counter has a second line of pencil writing under the first. I noticed it because the angle of the morning light this morning was different from the angle of the morning light any other morning, and the second line was visible in a way it had not been before. I did not pick the tag up. I did not bend over it. I did not put my reading glasses on. I want you to know that. I noticed the second line, and I poured my coffee, and I left the kitchen. The second line, from where I was standing, in the brief glance I gave it before I turned away, appeared to read in the same 9-year-old print as the first. Next. I am not going to look closer. I am going to finish this transcription. I am going to put on my shoes. I am going to walk to my daughter's school and pick her up at 2:50 the way I do every Tuesday. And we are going to walk home together along the route we always take, which goes past a small park and a bakery and a low brick wall she likes to balance on. We are going to come in through the front door. She's going to put her backpack on the bench in the entryway. She is going to go into the living room and start her homework. I am going to make her a snack. I am going to make her snack on the dining room table. I am not going into the kitchen this afternoon. I want you to know that the compressor is running. The light on the counter is bright. The pencil is moving on the page of the math packet in the next room, and my daughter is saying something I am not quite catching, and I am writing this last sentence in the present tense because I have not yet decided whether I am going to pick her up at 2:50 or whether I am going to leave the house at 2:30 and drive to the school instead, or whether I am going to call the school and ask them to keep her until I can think of a third option. The clock on the wall above the stove reads 1:38 p.m. The tag is on the counter. The ring is beside it. The drawer is closed.